Welcome back to Apex Sci-Fi. In the cold, harsh survivalism of the deep galaxy, there is an unspoken rule among the stars: protect your own. Most species are driven by a strict genetic priority. A Zoran will die for a Zoran. A hive drone will sacrifice itself for the queen. But no species, absolutely none, would ever waste a single drop of blood to protect a biological stranger. In a universe governed by the efficiency of the gene, altruism is considered a defect. To die for the offspring of another species is not just tragic, it is seen as a sign of low intelligence. Then there is the human phenomenon of pack bonding. Xenobiologists have spent centuries trying to understand it. Humans don't just bond with their own kind. They bond with dogs. They bond with cleaning robots. They bond with rocks if you give them a name and a face. And when a human decides that you are part of their pack, they undergo a chemical transformation that defies all biological logic. They stop being individuals and become guardians. This is the story of the siege of Lumina 4, and the day the Vortex swarm learned that the most dangerous place in the galaxy is the space between a human soldier and a child, no matter what planet that child is from. The Vortex were a race of apex scavengers. They didn't declare war, they harvested. They targeted the Zandari, a peaceful, fragile species of philosophers and artists whose bodies were made of translucent cartilage and glowing bioluminescent veins. The Zandari had no standing army. They were soft. They were easy prey. When the Vortex fleet descended on the colony of Lumina 4, the Zandari didn't fight back. They hid. They huddled in the dark, waiting for the end. The only reason the Vortex didn't finish the harvest in an hour was because of a single, stranded human, Corporal Jack Miller. Miller was a member of a diplomatic security detail that had been forgotten in the chaos of the initial retreat. He was one man, armed with a standard-issue pulse rifle, a combat knife, and a single crate of ammunition. He found himself trapped in a subterranean nursery with 60 Zandari larvae, small, glowing creatures that chittered with a sound like wind chimes. The Zandari parents had been taken or killed. The Vortex were coming down the main elevator shaft, their mandibles clicking in anticipation of a feast. Miller looked at the 60 blue children. He looked at the narrow 10-foot-wide service corridor that was the only entrance to the nursery. His tactical HUD told him the odds of survival were 0.0003%. Logic dictated that he should use his remaining fuel to blast his way to the surface and steal a scout ship. He owed the Zandari nothing. They weren't his species. They weren't even his allies, just a group he was supposed to watch for a few weeks. But then one of the Zandari children reached out a fragile, glowing hand and touched Miller's armored glove. Something in Miller's ancient, mammalian brain snapped into place. The pack bond was sealed. "Stay back, kids," Miller whispered, his voice distorted by his helmet's external speakers. "It's gonna get loud." He stepped into the corridor. He didn't build a barricade. He was the barricade. When the first wave of Vortex burst through the doors, they didn't see an army. They saw a lone human standing in the middle of the hall. The Vortex commander projected a sneering psychic message: "Move, meat thing. This harvest is not for you. Why die for a species that cannot even hold a weapon?" Miller didn't respond with words. He raised his rifle and opened fire. Thud, thud, thud. The corridor was narrow, a tactical choke point. The Vortex couldn't use their numbers. They had to face Miller one-on-one or two-on-two. For 3 hours, the hallway became a meat grinder. Miller fired until his rifle overheated and melted into a useless lump of slag. He threw it aside and drew his combat knife. The Vortex surged forward, sensing his weakness. They stabbed him with their chitinous spears. They tore at his armor with their serrated claws. Miller took wounds that would have stopped a tank. But every time he was struck, he looked back at the glowing blue children behind him, and the Adrenaline Protocol, episode 141, kept his heart beating. The Dead Man's 5 Minutes, episode 147, gave him the strength to ignore the blood filling his lungs. He wasn't fighting for Earth. He wasn't fighting for the Union. He was a father protecting a brood. And in that state, a human is the most terrifying thing in the universe. By the 5th hour, the corridor was piled 3 feet high with Vortex corpses. Miller was no longer standing. He was kneeling, propped up by his own shield, which he had jammed into the floor plates. He was covered in black alien ichor and his own red blood. The Vortex stopped. They had lost hundreds of warriors to a single, broken human. They couldn't understand the why. "Why do you still fight?" the Vortex commander demanded, his voice trembling with a sensation he had never felt: fear. "You are dead. Your heart is barely flickering. Why do you not move?" Miller raised his head. One eye was swollen shut and his visor was gone. He looked at the alien monsters and bared his teeth in a bloody, jagged grin. "Because," Miller wheezed, "they're my kids now. And you ain't gettin' past the front porch." The Vortuk prepared for one final, desperate charge. They gathered their remaining elite guard, ready to swarm the lone guardian. But as they lunged, the ceiling of the facility shattered. The Terran Relief Force had arrived. Drop pods, Episode 145, smashed into the Vortuk rear lines. Human Marines, seeing the carnage in the hallway, entered a state of collective rage. They saw Miller, still kneeling in front of the Zandari children, and they fell upon the Vortuk with a violence that shocked even the survivors. When the dust settled, the medics rushed to Miller. He was still holding his combat knife so tightly they had to pry it from his hands. He survived barely. But the impact on the galaxy was permanent. The Zandari didn't just survive, they became the most loyal allies humanity ever had. They built a massive cathedral on Lumina 4, dedicated not to a god, but to the Guardian. The Vortuk never attacked a human-protected sector again. They realized that you can fight a soldier for land or for gold or for power. But you cannot win against a human who has decided that you are threatening his pack. Today, there is a new term in the Galactic Dictionary for absolute security. It is called the human shield. It doesn't mean a piece of technology. It refers to the human instinct to stand in the way of a storm to keep someone else dry. In the military academies of a dozen different species, they now teach the Miller exception. Logic dictates that an individual will prioritize their own life. However, if a human is present, all logic is void. They will bridge the gap between species with their own bodies. They will adopt the galaxy as their own. And if you touch their pack, they will burn the stars to find you. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. We aren't the most logical species, but we are the only ones who will call you brother before we even know your name. If you've ever felt a protective instinct for someone who wasn't even your kind, hit that like button. You've got that guardian heart. Comment below. Why do you think humans bond with other species so easily? Subscribe. And remember, someone's got your back. The pack survives.